Hi everyone. In today's video, we are going to go over the concepts of security list, routing rules, and different types of gateways like internet gateway, NAT gateway, service gateway that we can configure in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So let's start with the security list. So as the name suggests, security list basically controls what sort of traffic that you want to allow inside your subnet and what sort of traffic that you want to allow to go out of your subnet. So in reality, it acts like a firewall restricting that traffic. Now, as you can see in this diagram on my screen, I have two subnets, subnet A, subnet B, residing inside the VCN, and there is an internet gateway configured. So what is happening essentially here is subnet A is allowing the flow of information from the subnet, or sorry, from the internet gateway into your subnet A. And then subnet A is basically communicating the information to subnet B. So for subnet A, there is a flow of information from internet into subnet A, and for subnet A, there is a flow of information out of subnet A into subnet B. Similarly, for subnet B, there is a flow of information or traffic from subnet A into subnet B, and there could be a flow of traffic or information out of subnet B. This is what this diagram represents. So essentially, security list, whenever we create a security list, it gets attached to your subnet. And it is a mandatory configuration that even if you don't create, whenever you configure a VCN or whenever you configure the setup using a VCN wizard, the security list is automatically created and a default security list is tied to your subnet, whether it is a public subnet or private subnet. Now, one thing to note here is whenever a security list is tied to a subnet, it gets tied to all the VNICs or all the instances inside the subnet. So for example, if you have a subnet with three VNICs or three instances inside it, whenever you configure a security list, the parameters or the rules are tied to all the VNICs inside it. If there is a security requirement wherein you want to bifurcate that security by VNIC, then what Oracle recommends is instead of security list, you go for network security group. So there is a different configuration that you have to do. And whenever you configure a NSG or a network security group, that you can do at the VNIC level. So this is what the recommendation is, that if you want to apply a security list to a subnet, remember that the security rules are applied to all the VNICs inside that particular subnet. Now, there are up to 5 security lists that you can create and configure and attach to a particular subnet. Now, when you configure a security list, and this is something that I will show you in the demo also, there is a particular parameter that you will note, which tells you whether the flow of information is stateless or stateful. By default, if you don't choose anything, the flow of information is stateful. Now, what is the difference between stateful and stateless? So the major difference is whenever the flow of information or whenever you configure a security list with stateful as a configuration, the flow of egress rule or the flow of outward information is automatically tracked and allowed. That means you don't need to create any egress rule for it. Now, what is ingress and egress is, if I go to my earlier slide, the flow of information coming inside the subnet is decided by the ingress rule that you define, and the flow of information that is going out of the subnet is governed by the egress rule that you define. So this is the difference between ingress and egress. Now let's go back to our next slide. So like I was saying, for a stateful security list, you don't really need to define a egress rule because the flow of information is automatically tracked and allowed. So if you see here, we have instance A and host A. So there is an incoming traffic into instance A from host A, and there is an outgoing traffic from instance A to host A. So in such case, all you need to do is you just need to define a ingress rule that will allow the incoming traffic on, let's say, port 80. But in case of stateless egress, you will also need to define a egress rule that will tell that there is a outgoing traffic from instance A to host A, as it is shown in the diagram. So there are two arrows. One is incoming traffic from incoming traffic into instance A from host A, which is governed by the ingress rule. But you will also need to create another egress rule which tells that there is a outgoing traffic from instance A into host A. So this is a difference between stateful and stateless. And like I mentioned, whenever you create a security list, by default, it is stateful. Now, moving on to the next slide, the routing rules or the route rules. Now, one need to understand the difference between security list and route rules because both act more or less in controlling the security. But you need to understand that a security list controls what sort of data should come in and what sort of data should, or what sort of traffic should come in and what sort of traffic should go out. Whereas route rules decide where that traffic should go. So one decides what traffic to come in and what traffic to go out, and route rule decides where that traffic should go. So by default, whenever you configure a VCN and the subnet, your security list and routing rules are automatically attached by default. Again, similar to your security list, even the routing rules are applied at the subnet level. Now, if you see the diagram here, I have a VCN. Inside that, I have a public subnet. Now, this public subnet is basically communicating, or it is allowing the data from the internet to come in and the data to go out. So this is controlled by internet gateway. So whenever you want that the communication with, with the internet and a subnet, and if the subnet is public subnet, you have to configure internet gateways. So I'll go into the details of what sort of gateway you have to configure depending on what sort of subnet you have. But if we just stick to this information on my slide here, it represents that there is a public subnet inside a VCN, and it is trying to communicate with the traffic that is there over the internet. So the routing rule, the way you define the routing rule and attach that routing rule at the public subnet level is you will give a destination CIDR block because it is internet. You will give it as 000/0, and you have to give the destination target. Now, because my subnet type is public subnet, the destination target will be internet gateway. If my subnet type is private subnet cannot communicate with the internet using an internet gateway. You have to configure the NAT gateway, which I will explain in my next slides. So this is a difference between security list and route rules. Moving on to the next slide. Now let's understand the difference between different types of gateways. So if you see the information that is on the upper part of my slide, it is talking about what internet gateway is and how the traffic is controlled using the internet gateway. So I have a VCN with two subnets inside it. One is my public subnet A and another one is private subnet B. Now, this public subnet wants to communicate with the information on the internet. It will happen using a internet gateway because the information is, or the traffic is flowing between the internet and public subnet. But if the communication has to happen between the private subnet and the internet, then like I mentioned, it should be controlled by NAT gateway. It cannot be controlled, or it cannot happen via internet gateway. Now the next type of gateways is service gateway. Now there are certain regional services that Oracle offers, like your object storage, ADW, and there are others which are regional services. Now how your subnets will communicate with these regional services, which are not bound by a particular VCN or something like that. In such cases, to communicate with these kind of services, you have to first configure a service gateway, and you have to define a certain security rule and a route rule so that your private subnet can communicate with these regional services using a service gateway. So in a nutshell, if I have to summarize what is service gateway, service gateway is something that allows a communication of your subnets with the services that are regional, classified as regional services like object storage, ADW, and there are other regional services also. So this is basically a summary or a theoretical part of security rules, route security list, route rules, and different types of gateways. Now let's go back to our cloud console. Let's connect to our cloud tenancy, and I would just walk you through the configuration of the security list and route rules that we have seen. So I will. Okay. So if you remember in one of the earlier videos, we have used VCN wizard to configure a VCN. So if you have gone through that video, you would have seen that because we have used a VCN wizard, it automatically created a VCN and two subnets for us, public subnet and private subnet. Now, if you see it also because of the VCN wizard, it automatically created internet gateways. You see one in the bracket. So there is one internet gateway created, there is one NAT gateway and one service gateway. Now let's go to the security list. So you see that there are two security lists that are created. Let's go to security list and let me go to default security list. Now one of the important thing to note here is stateless. So by default, uh, like I mentioned, all your security list will be stateful. That's why it is marked as no here. Similarly, there will be some ingress rules and egress rules. And like I mentioned, ingress rule decides what sort of traffic is allowed inside the subnet, and egress rule will decide what sort of traffic allowed outside the subnet. Now, if I go to my VCN again, and if I open one of the subnets, like for example, public subnet, you will see that there is a security list by default attached to the subnet along with the routing table. Now let's go back to the subnet and security list. If I just try to create a security list here, it will it will tell me that it will ask me for a name, a compartment. It will ask me to create a ingress rule. You need to give a specific ingress rule depending on what sort of traffic you want to allow. Similarly, you have to define a egress rule, and you have to decide what sort of traffic you want to allow to go out of your subnet, and then create a security list. I'll not create it right now. I have just canceled it. Similarly, if I go to routing tables and if I click create route table, I need to give a name. I need to select a compartment and just click a route table. Now, one thing you need to know is if I go to internet gateway, so it will ask me for a create internet gateway and select the different options. If I go to route tables and select one of the route tables and click on add route rules, it will ask me to decide what sort of target type I need to pick up. Now, if you see here, there are different types of route rules. So here you need to decide what sort of routing rule you have to create, whether you want to create an internet gateway, NAT gateway, service gateway. Local peering gateway I have not covered, but local peering gateway is something where you want to establish a connectivity between two VCNs. Oh, sorry, correct, two VCNs. Let me click on cancel. Let me go back to my, okay. Let me see if something else I can cover. So if I go back to my VCN again, there is no dynamic routing gateway configured, two security lists, no local peering gateway. If I click on public subnet, yeah, if you see here at a subnet level, it is attached. And like I mentioned, even if you don't create a security list and routing tables, a default configuration automatically creates a default security list and route tables, and it attaches to a subnet. So let's go back to our presentation. All right. So what we have covered in this video is the theoretical understanding of what security list is, what route rules are, and what are the different types of gateways. In the next session or in the next video, what we are going to do is we are going to do a practical implementation of what we discussed just now. So as you can see on my screen here, whatever configuration you see in this diagram, this is something that we are going to try out practically. So we are going to create a VCN. We are going to create one public subnet. We are going to create one private subnet. We will configure internet gateway, service gateway, NAT gateway, and we will try to establish a connectivity of the traffic from internet to your Bastion subnet, from Bastion subnet to your private subnet, and from private subnet to your service gateway and NAT gateway. So all this, how to do it in OCI infrastructure is something that we will see practically. Hope you have enjoyed this video, which was telling about, the theoretical concepts of what security lists and routing rules are. I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much.